There's no spin necessary for the June jobs numbers released today by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The latest report illustrates the results of intense political activism from government leaders. Plain and simple, the numbers are a victory for Republicans. The economy added 80,000 jobs in June. That means the modest gains from the first 3 months of the year are leveled out by the last three, which averaged 75,000 per month. 4 months before the presidential election, job growth is treading water. It should come as no surprise that Mitt Romney put blame for the stagnation squarely on the president's shoulders.
The president's policies have clearly not been successful in reigniting this economy, in putting people back to work, in opening up manufacturing plants across the country. The heartland industries where manufacturing occurs are struggling by virtue of policies on the part of the president that have not worked. The president doesn't have a plan, hasn't proposed any new ideas to get the economy going, just the same old ideas of the past that have failed.
Look, it's a pretty solid political strategy. The Republican Party spends 3 years obstructing the president's agenda for jobs creation. Then when the jobs don't come, blame the president and say he has no plan. In order for this to work, you need to hope the entire electorate comes down with amnesia. Then maybe people will forget about the American Jobs Act proposed by the president. Moody's estimated it would create nearly 2 million jobs. But for the people who remember how Republicans in Congress killed the American Jobs Act before it could reach a vote, you just have to come up with a scary phrase to make voters think the president is hurting them.
We have seen the jobs report this morning, and it is another kick in the gut to middle-class families. And this kick in the gut has got to end.
By Mitt Romney's standards, he should know a lot about getting kicked in the gut. When he was governor of Massachusetts, reporters were asking him why there was not more job growth under his administration. Here's how Mitt Romney explained away the kick to the gut of the middle class back in 2006.
You guys are bright enough to look at the numbers. I came in and the jobs had been just falling like off a cliff. And I came in and they kept falling for 11 months. And then we turned around and we're coming back. And that's progress. And if you're going to suggest to me that somehow the day I got elected, somehow jobs should immediately turn around, well, that would be silly. It takes a while to get things turned around. We were in a recession. We were losing jobs every month. We've turned around, and since the turnaround, we've added 50,000 jobs.
To paraphrase Sean Carter, that man good. The Obama campaign should hire this guy to help explain the reality of job growth after a recession. He does a pretty good job. Back in Reality Today, President Obama addressed the latest job numbers, calling them a step in the right direction, but not enough for the struggling unemployed.
We learned this morning that our businesses created 84,000 new jobs last month. And that overall means that businesses have created 4.4 million new jobs over the past 28 months, including 500,000 new manufacturing jobs. We can't be satisfied because our goal was never to just keep on working to get back to where we were back in 2007. I want to get back to a time when middle-class families and those working to get into the middle class have some basic security.
Indeed, some of that security was reflected in the jobs report. Hourly wages for working Americans continue to increase. But with more than 12 million Americans earning no wages, it's hard to keep an upbeat perspective about the latest numbers. And what solutions are being proposed by Republicans to create more jobs? Well, let's see. Let's see what Speaker John Boehner had to say in a statement today. Next week, we'll vote to fully repeal the president's health care law. And before the month is out, we'll vote on legislation to curtail excessive government regulations. Cutting protective regulations, rejecting universal health care, and of course, Republicans want to make permanent the tax cuts for the super rich. If you think this prescription sounds a lot like the Bush years, you're not alone.
It is a theory. It's an idea of how you might grow an economy if we hadn't just tried it for 10 years before I took office.
That's a nice way of saying been there, done that. Even with less than desirable monthly jobs numbers, this election is still about a distinct choice. Mitt Romney and the Republicans want to take us back to the economic policies of George W. Bush. President Obama wants to continue on the path that's led to 28 straight months of consecutive job growth. As a certain former governor of Massachusetts once said, it takes a while to get things turned around. It takes even longer if one party wants to make sure things don't turn around at all. Get your cell phones out. I want to know what you think. Tonight's question: are the disappointing job numbers because of President Obama's policies or GOP obstruction? Text A for President Obama's policies. Text B for GOP obstruction to 622-639. Or go to our blog at ed.msnbc.com. I'll bring you the results later in the show. I'm joined by MSNBC political analyst Richard Wolff. Richard, have Republicans boxed in President Obama by preventing any jobs legislation from passing? They have been clearly obstructionist.
Well, they have, and they have from the start. But, you know, if you get tactical success, that doesn't mean that either you're dealing with the problems you're elected to solve or, in fact, you're going to win strategically in political terms. And I'd like to draw a comparison with events that conservatives felt very strongly, we all felt very strongly about, which was in the Bush administration, 9/11. We went through this, just these last few years, an economic 9/11. That economic meltdown was a serious crisis that started out in this country and spread around the world. Now, it's one thing for one party to say, we're not going to help you out. We're not going to give you any votes when you've gone through this crisis, this economic 9/11, and you can deal with it on your own. But now at this point, you have a candidate who's bound by those same misjudgments. You have a candidate who actually wants to go back to a pre-economic meltdown, a pre-9/11 mindset, which is to pretend like it never happened and to say we can go back to a time when the banks were all great and you could just deregulate and everything would be fine. We live in this post-meltdown world, and that mindset of obstructionism or pretending it never happened is not going to convince the voters in November.
But isn't it even worse than that, given your brilliant analysis here in regard to the ostrich in the ground? We know ostriches don't actually do that, but for metaphor's sake, let's continue that. Is it the fact that in 9/11, the one that actually occurred, Americans came together and joined together across party lines? This is the bitter division of a kind of refusal to get together and unify, the very language that the Republicans have often thrust upon non-patriotic progressives. Isn't this something of a contradiction here?
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's a failure of public duty, most of all. Look, you don't even need the fingers on one hand to count the number of Republicans who voted for the Recovery Act. There had been a long track record of people from both parties saying, you know, in times of recession, we need stimulus spending, we need to come together. This was a crisis, a global crisis that started in this country, and there was a refusal to engage. Now, I understand why Republicans were shy about that. They thought that the TARP vote to bail out the banks was terrible. Everyone did. But in the end, the banks survived because of that. The auto industry survived because of that. And looking back, no matter what their position was to begin with, no matter what heat they took, if you're in public office, you've got to say you're going to do things for the public good. You may have a difference of approach. You may want more tax cuts and maybe less government spending in terms of infrastructure, but in the end, your job is as a public official, and I think that's why if you look at the polls, people do still blame the Republican administration or Republican president for this situation, as well as the banks.
Well, there's no doubt when you look back, this president looks like something like a phenomenon. Some economists are suggesting today that the Federal Reserve needs to intervene. But here's the mentality of many Republicans when it comes to monetary intervention by the Fed.
If this guy prints more money between now and the election, I don't know what y'all would do to him in Iowa, but we would treat him pretty ugly down in Texas.
Now, Richard, is there political pressure from Republicans on Ben Bernanke to stay out of the labor market?
Well, there has been pressure all along, and there's pressure to avoid the next round of what they call quantitative easing, which Rick Perry seems to think is the worst evil you could possibly imagine. The Federal Reserve bankrolled not just the big banks in New York, but it bankrolled major corporations across the world when the meltdown happened. It's the height of irresponsibility to try and play politics when the world is looking at another crisis in Europe. The Federal Reserve may be the only institution that can act as the lender of last resort for the entire world. That's American leadership. We should be celebrating that. It's scary. It's devastating that we even have to go through it. But America has a unique role in the world. We should not be trying to take that away, just as Republicans would hate the idea that America's military power should not be preeminent in this world either.
Yeah, their rejection and repudiation of another version of American exceptionalism. Richard Wolff, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Remember to answer tonight's question there at the bottom of the screen. Share your thoughts on Twitter @EdShow and on Facebook. We want to know what you think. Coming up, Mitt Romney plugged his 59-point plan for economic growth today, but that very same plan has underwhelmed even his Republican supporters. Ezra Klein joins me next.